So now let's continue with the third important concept of this session, and it's going to be the Libor. The Libor is the rate that we just talked about before when we had the story here, this 0.5%. That is actually what we call the Libor. Libor is it means London Interbank Offer Rate. That's the normal name or the proper name. But in this case, we just call it Libor because it's simpler, but we also need to be careful because since it says Libor, it sounds like it's from the UK, right? It sounds like it's the rate for the British pound, like the cost of borrowing pounds, because it says London. But in truth, the truth is that it is called like that because the first time that someone calculated this rate was in London, and then because of that they call it like that, Libor, or London Interbank Offer Rate. But there are Libors for every currency in the world. Libor for dollar, Libor for peso, Libor for any type of currency. So it is just London because the first one was calculated there. And also another thing that's kind of like a mistake is that people call it Libor rate. So, but if you think about it, it's like saying rate twice, like London Interbank Offer Rate. So it is not totally right, but in practice, people call it Libor rate. So important things that we need to know about the Libor is that it is the cheapest rate in the world. That's the first thing that we need to think about. Also, it is the most popular benchmark for when calculating any type of value for anything. And I will talk about that later, because this Libor is like the proxy, or is like it shows you how expensive it is to have money. So from that, it affects everything. Every security, every asset in the world is affected by this. If this rate gets higher, then everything will get more expensive, just because it affects everything. This is the cost of money. So if the cost of money is more expensive, everything will become more expensive. And then why is it the cheapest rate in the world? I just told it in the previous video. It is because the people who deal with this are private banks. It's their job to do this. They are super rich. They know about finance. So the risk of not paying is very low. So usually we say that this rate reflects how the world is doing in general terms, because the only way that this rate can get higher is if it seems that there are problems in the world, if the banks think that there will be problems that the other bank won't pay because there is like a problem in the economy or something like that. So if this rate gets higher, it's because it shows something is wrong. And I will talk also about what happens with the rates that the government lend money later on. That's another story. The rate from the government to people, at what rate do they lend money? That's different, because this is even more important than the other. This is the core of everything. So those three things, remember, it is the cheapest, it is the one that affects every asset in the world, and also it is like that because it is cheap, and it is like that is not that is the benchmark for everything, because it's the one that it doesn't have that much risk because it's traded between banks. But I remember the first time I learned about Libor, like 11 years ago or more, because I was in my bachelor, so probably more. But I remember that I learned about this and I said, oh my God, this thing is so important that it should be super complicated how it is set. Like if it is 2% or whatever, like this number, like 0.5%, that guy must have done a lot of work to come for that number, to bring that number up. He must have done a lot of crazy calculations. But then later I learned that's not true. And actually, at the same time that I was studying, something brutal happened in the world, the financial crisis from 2007, 2008. So I will tell you another story. And I wrote that there's a typo in there, another story. It sounds like the Libor rate, right? So this story is sadly a true story. So actually how this rate is set, that 0.5%, it is, well, banks claim that they do a lot of calculations, but in fact it's, maybe they do something, but in fact is that they just set the rate like this, or whoever it is will say, I will lend you the money at this rate. And if the other bank thinks it's all right and he agrees on paying that, then it's done. And that's the rate, as simple as that. There is not much documentation that you need to build. You don't have to report anything. It's just, you just set it and it's done. So what happened in the financial crisis in 2008 is that first it happened in the US. So first the US went into a recession, and then people, well, we can talk about that crisis if you want later on in the course. I think we will talk about that in, I think, second week or third week. But we had the recession in the US. So people were not getting more loans, people were losing their jobs, people were not paying their mortgages, complete disaster in the economy. So in the UK, the same thing was starting to happen. People losing their jobs, also people getting scared and stop investing, a lot of problems in the economy. So the banks realized that, not the banks as the organization, but the managers of the banks realized that they were not getting their targets of their goals, their objectives as employees, as managers, because people were in a crisis, like there was a financial crisis. So they were not getting enough, they were not selling enough loans, credit cards, all of these things. And apart from that, because there was more risk in the market, the rate increased. I mean, like, people realized there was a problem in the US, there was a problem that was spilling over Europe too. So then the debt crisis in Europe was also starting in 2008. So then the banks started to increase the rate. Instead of 0.5, this guy will say, no, that's too cheap. I will charge 2% because the US is in problem, so I will charge more. So anyway, the rise of the rate also affected the business of the banks, because the more expensive was the rate, people will not get credit cards or loans or anything. They will stay away from that. So then the managers of the bank realized about this. They had two problems. First, people didn't have money. It was a crisis in there. Also, the rate was getting more expensive. And then they realized about what I realized also about their Libor rate, that it is actually fixed between people, between two people. It's not like there is a lot of calculations in there. It's just that they decide that's the rate and that's what it is. So what happens is that instead of instead of having a higher rate, what happened is that the banks artificially lower the rate, because they realized that with a higher rate, people will not get credit cards. So they did the opposite. They started lending money at a cheaper rate, and even they faked loans in between the banks to lower the grade. Like, maybe they were lending money, but there was no need for that. They just sent money to lower the rate, and then they just did it like that all the time. So this is horrible in terms of society. Like, if you are manipulating something so important, it will create a mess. And let me show you the impact that this can have. So here we have a huge number. It's almost $1 trillion, and that's the amount of credit card debt in the US, I think, from 2 years ago. Then this is $2.5 trillion. That's the GDP of the UK. So everything that the UK consumes, exports minus imports, expenses and investment, everything is 2.5 trillion. 15 trillion, that's the GDP of the US. So the same thing, but for the US. $70 trillion, that's the world GDP of 1 year. In 1 year, the whole world consumes, invest, spend, and export minus imports, $70 trillion. And this number, $800 trillion, is the total value of assets affected by the Libor. So as I told you before, the Libor affects everything. So you can see the impact of the Libor in the world. If there are changes in the Libor, it will affect this amount. It's 12 years of work world work. It's like 11 years of the world working. So it's crazy how much the Libor affects the global economy. So that thing plus the Eurobond crisis plus the housing crisis in the US was the perfect recipe for a disaster. Here is a graph with these numbers, but in a graph. So it's crazy, right? I think Mexican GDP will be around here, probably invisible. And this is the amount of assets affected by that thing. So you will think also that if someone did a kind of this bad thing, unethical practice, he will get really punished or something. But what happened was not true. Well, here is a little bit about the story that in 2008, that thing started, the crisis. 2010, the Libor was cheaper for most of the currencies, which was kind of weird. And 2010, the UK financial authorities started an investigation. And the good thing that is what they found, that they found this quite quick compared to other frauds. They found it quite quick. Like it took them like about a year to find what was going on. And then they were able to stop it because that was really bad. The whole economy in the world relies on banks doing their jobs and they weren't doing it. So it was horrible. But in the end, the end is not written in here, but the end, what happened is that I think only like 3 or 4 people went to jail for like 2 or 3 years. I think some banks, there were 10 banks involved in this. I think the largest bank was RBS, Royal Bank of Scotland, and Barclays as well. They were involved in this. I think the CEO went to jail for a couple of years, and also they had to pay like a 100 million pound fee or something like that. But imagine how much money they made. It wasn't that much. And in the end, yeah, it was Barclays was fined for almost $500 million, and the CEO of Barclays quit after this. But I think he didn't go to jail. I think he actually went for he wanted to become mayor of London. I think at some point. It was crazy. So that's the end of the story about the Libor. Like the takeaway point from the Libor, this is just like more some drama on the Libor thing, because what matters for the course is that you understand what's the Libor, is the cheapest rate, and is the cheapest and the benchmark for money. It tells you the cost of money, and we will use this for everything, almost everything in the course. Almost all the calculations use the Libor, or at least are based on Libor. That's why it's so important that you learn it. So cheapest, safest, and there is some drama in there. So we're almost done. We just need to learn about one more concept, the exchange rate. So let me finish this video and we start again.